Tell me in the comments if you are like me in that I went to church every Sunday for almost 20 years and no one cared to tell me that the Gospel of Matthew was likely not written by the Apostle Matthew. No one seemed to think that was an important detail to mention. This video showcases a somewhat controversial idea that the canonical Gospels were not written by the individuals named in their titles. I'm going to talk a lot more about authorship of the Gospels. It's a supremely important element of Christianity, and you should not take these following quotations from prominent theologians and scholars as sufficient evidence to conclude that the Gospel authors were not the traditionally accepted authors. There are people on both sides, prominent spokespeople, scholars, and theologians on both sides of this issue. So instead, you should reason it out in your mind, use logical thinking, and go through the evidences, both historically and textually, to make your own conclusions. I'll help you do that. In future videos, I'll go step by step into the logic and reasoning behind the conclusion that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not the authors, likely, of these canonical Gospels. And at the end of the day, we cannot have a knowledge on this topic. At best, what we can have is a probability one way or the other. Henry Dodwell was a 17th century scholar and theologian. In his work, Dissertations upon Irenaeus, he wrote, "We have at this day certain most authentic ecclesiastical writers of the times, as Clemens Romanus, Barnabas, Hermas, Ignatius, and Polycarp, who wrote in the order wherein I have named them, and after all the writers of the New Testament. But in Hermas you will not find one passage or any mention of the New Testament, nor in all the rest is any one of the evangelists named." This is significant because in the works of some of these authors, gospel passages are used, but they are not cited by using the names of the evangelists. N.T. Wright, likely the most notable Christian scholar of a generation, a Catholic priest and theologian, said,
"I don't know who the gospel writers were, and nor does anyone else, actually. Likewise, I don't know when or where they wrote their gospels, and despite 200 years of scholarship, nor does anyone else. And people will tell you, oh, Matthew was written in 85 AD in Syria, but we don't know that. There's no hard evidence for it," and so on and so on.
Modern biblical scholar Richard Bauckham argued for gospel accuracy, but wrote, "The argument of this book that the texts of our gospels are close to the eyewitness reports of the words and deeds of Jesus runs counter to almost all recent scholarship." That's from Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, page 240. So as he's writing his book in favor of gospel accuracy and its maintenance of the Christian tradition, of Jesus' sayings and so forth, he's saying this idea disagrees with the opinions of almost all modern scholars on this topic. Bart Ehrman, a modern critical New Testament scholar, wrote, "Because our surviving Greek manuscripts provide such a wide variety of different titles for the Gospels, textual scholars have long realized that their familiar names do not go back to a single original title, but were added by later scribes." That's in Apocalyptic Prophet of the New Millennium, pages 249 through 250. The very website for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops states clearly in their synopsis of the Gospel of Matthew, "The ancient tradition that the author was the disciple and apostle of Jesus named Matthew is untenable, because the Gospel is based in large part on the Gospel according to Mark. Almost all the verses of that Gospel have been utilized in this. And it is hardly likely that a companion of Jesus would have followed so extensively an account that came from one who admittedly never had such an association, rather than rely on his own memories." And that's still up on their website as of today, December 2022. It's usccb.org. In the Oxford annotated version of the Bible itself, this is reaffirmed. "Neither the evangelists nor their first readers engaged in historical analysis. Their aim was to confirm Christian faith. Scholars generally agree that the Gospels were written 40 to 60 years after the death of Jesus. They thus do not present eyewitness or contemporary accounts of Jesus' life and teachings." That's in the Oxford Annotated Bible, page 1744. The prominent scholar and Catholic priest Raymond Brown writes, "No gospel identifies its author. The common designations placed before the Gospels, for example, the Gospel according to Matthew, stem from the late 2nd century and represent an educated estimate of the authorship by church scholars of that period who were putting together traditions and guesses pertinent to attribution. Jesus did not write an account of his passion, nor did anyone who had been present write an eyewitness account. Available to us are 4 different accounts written some 30 to 70 years later in the Gospels of Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, all of which were dependent on tradition that had come down from an intervening generation or generations. That intervening pre-gospel tradition was not preserved, even if at times we may be able to detect the broad lines of its content. When we seek to reconstruct it, or even more adventurously, the actual situation of Jesus himself, we are speculating. That's in The Death of the Messiah, pages 4 through 5. In the Catholic Encyclopedia, we read, "The titles of our Gospels were not intended to indicate authorship. The headings were affixed to them." That's in the Catholic Encyclopedia, the Farley edition, volume 1, page 117, also in volume 6, pages 655 through 656. Professor of the New Testament Robert Kaiser, in his contribution to the Anchor Bible Dictionary, writes of the Gospel of John, "The supposition that the author was one and the same with the beloved disciple is often advanced as a means of ensuring that the evangelist did witness Jesus' ministry. 2 other passages are advanced as evidence of the same. John chapter 19, verse 35, and John chapter 21, verse 24. But both falter under close scrutiny. Chapter 19, verse 35 does not claim that the author was the one who witnessed the scene, but only that the scene is related on the sound basis of eyewitness. Chapter 21, verse 24 is part of the appendix of the gospel, and should not be assumed to have come from the same hand as that responsible for the body of the gospel. Neither of these passages, therefore, persuades many Johannine scholars that the author claims eyewitness status." That's in the Anchor Bible Dictionary, volume 3, pages 919 through 920. As I said before, do your own work to make these conclusions. It's a logical fallacy to just listen to an authority and presume it's true. Find out the reasons why these things are true. Don't just listen to these people. And I'll help you. Like I said, I'm going to go a lot more into detail about the exact reasons why we shouldn't think that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote these books.